Here on JoBlo Horror, we cover so much from the 80s and 90s, but the truth is, there's more horror floating around now than ever before. With the rise of horror studios like Blumhouse or prestige studios like A24 realizing that horror can not only be profitable but award-worthy, the theaters have no shortage of scary. That's not even including streaming services like Tubi, Shudder, and even the Big Four going all in on either producing or showcasing horror on their platforms. A lot of these end up being successful, but some of them flounder a bit even when they deserve to soar. Today's movie has good names in front of and behind the camera, a solid idea, good core, and one hell of an underperformance at the box office. Today, we look at the alternative World War II take, Overlord, and see why it's one of the best horror movies you never saw. JJ Abrams, love him or hate him, has contributed a lot to the worlds of both TV and movies. He's heavily involved in both the Star Trek and Star Wars universes, something that seems quite at odds with one another, as he has directed films in both of the recent sequel or reboot series. He also is heavily involved in the Cloverfield and Mission Impossible worlds, with producing credits for both, and he even directed Mission Impossible 3, which set the series on its current course. One could argue that his small screen contributions are even better, with creating the mega shows Felicity, Alias, Fringe, and his most popular, Lost. Before all that though, he wrote screenplays for things that nobody connected with him like Forever Young, Regarding Henry, Joyride, and even Armageddon. Sometimes though, he gets an idea that he's too busy to write or direct, and it gets produced but forgotten just as quickly as it comes out. Back in 2013, JJ Abrams had the idea and basic outline of the movie and tasked writer Billy Ray with the first draft of the script. Ray is the Oscar-nominated writer for 2013's Captain Phillips, starring Tom Hanks. But Ray had been around long before that, starting with the screenplay for the Bruce Willis erotic thriller, Color of Night, followed by scripts for Volcano, Hearts of War, Flight, and movies following Overlord like Gemini Man and Terminator Dark Fate. The screenplay would change over the years, and Mark L. Smith would eventually be brought in to make touch-ups. Smith had already written Vacancy and The Revenant, but not many other high-profile scripts. Paramount Pictures actually bought the rights for it and were the ones to bring in Smith and finish the script. Abrams' own Bad Robot Productions also jumped on board, and the cast was announced in April and May of 2017. Filming began in September of the same year and wrapped 4 months later in January of 2018. The movie opens in a cool black and white filter but quickly goes to color with a newsreel style title card. We are in an American transport plane the day before D-Day, and the soldiers are on a mission to knock out a radar jamming tower on top of a church behind enemy lines. We get a ton of different character introductions with many of the typical tropes. The nervous soldier, the stoic and quiet prickly one, the green ones, and the guy that talks way too much. The plane is attacked and we start losing soldiers left and right. It's a cool homage to Aliens, where a badass team of soldiers is introduced, only to have most of them quickly die before much of the action even begins. The ones that make it out before the plane blows up aren't out of the woods yet either, both figuratively and literally. Bodies hang from the trees and Nazi soldiers patrol the woods looking for American soldiers. Eventually, we're down to just 4 soldiers with Ford, Boyce, Tibbet, and Chase. These soldiers are played by Wyatt Russell, Giovanni Depo, John Magaro, and Ian K-Stacker. Russell may be the most famous, and it shouldn't be just because of his famous and iconic parents, Goldie Hawn and especially Kurt Russell. Wyatt had been working for a bit, even showing up in his dad's mid-90s movie Soldier and Escape from LA, before showing up in things like Cowboys and Aliens, Cold in July, and 22 Jump Street.
Me and this guy are having a meet cute.
After this movie, he would show up in the Marvel Universe as Captain John Walker in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The remaining troops come across a woman named Chloe, and she takes them into town with their radio tower inside of it. She hides them in her home, and it's here where we start to realize something isn't quite right. Many movies, from Frankenstein's Army to Hellboy, have dabbled with the idea of the Nazi war machine looking into the occult, but Overlord manages to keep it fresh and suspenseful. Chloe's mom has been experimented on in the church by Nazis, but we don't know exactly why or what with. An officer comes by the house and assaults Chloe, but our guys intervene, putting themselves and the mission at risk. We see more of these experiments and realize about the same time as the squad that their mission is far more important than just a radio tower. We follow Boyce as he heads to the rendezvous point, but he's forced to hide amongst a ton of dead bodies as the trucks bring him into the lower levels of the church. He comes across something that doesn't even seem human anymore, and it's a good showcase for the effects in this movie. While there is plenty that is achieved using CGI, there is also just as fantastic makeup and practical effects. The CGI is done well too, not overwhelming the rest of the work done by the artists on set, and it doesn't make it look fake or out of place. Boyce finds the main experimentation room and also frees one of his fellow paratroopers. The entire sequence is done with almost no dialogue, and it is a showcase for why we like Boyce. Boyce makes it back with his brother in arms and a vial of something. They grill the soldier they captured, Waffner. He only explains that it's all for the war and those experimented on are being given a chance to rise above what they once were to do great things. If Waffner looks familiar, it's because he's good at playing scumbag villains. He's also the selfish Euron Greyjoy in Game of Thrones. He's clean shaven here, but once you realize it, it's hard not to see just how bad he is. After some light torture, Waffner attempts to escape while still covered in a mask and gets several shots off, one hitting Chase. As Chase dies, Boyce injects him with the syringe that he took from the church, but nothing happens. At first, Chase sits up in a start while still having problems breathing and asks for water. He downs an entire canteen and everything seems normal before his veins pop and his body begins to contort. He has to be put down, and it's another great mixture of CGI and practical effects. Waffner says that they're zombies for the 1,000-year Reich. Waffner escapes with Chloe's little brother, and we get a quick but brutal action sequence before the remaining three decide to go after it all. Waffner, the radar, the factory, and every trace of the serum. Waffner takes the serum himself and begins to change. It's different when you're alive, and he's now the super soldier that they were trying to make. In addition to the movies we talked about, the whole film has a return to Castle Wolfenstein feel, an early 2000s sequel to one of the granddaddies of first-person shooters that added more occult elements than any of the previous games. The team splits up and goes about taking everything out, and here is where the movie does something really cool. Once the bomb is set with an 18-minute timer, the bomb explodes after 18 actual minutes. Chloe is able to find her brother and send him back to the village, and one of the creatures escapes its cell. The movie splits the last half hour or so between supernatural horror film and daring wartime escape in the same vein as The Dirty Dozen or even Saving Private Ryan. Waffner has completely changed now into a supervillain, or an overlord if you will, and does a little bit of monologuing with Ford. There's a black tar that has been running underneath the village for centuries, and they were able to mix it with all of the bodies from the Great War to create the serum. Ford is impaled on a meat hook near the center of the tar and is bleeding out. Waffner intends to torture him like they did to him back in the house. Boyce is able to buy Ford just enough time to get off the hook, but since he knows he's dying, he takes an injection to fight Waffner serum to serum. Ford isn't quite strong enough yet, so Boyce blows Waffner into the tar and then is forced by Ford to leave. Ford is turning fast, and Wyatt takes a serious page out of his dad's book and channels some of his best character work. He lures the rest of the soldiers into the center room while Waffner pulls himself out of the well. Ford realizes that the Nazis shouldn't have this power, but really, neither should they. Boyce makes it out just as the explosion kicks in. The town is liberated, and the threat is over, and Boyce lies to his superior officer to make sure everything stays that way. The movie didn't do well at all. It had its wide release on November 9th, 2018 and only made $41 million on its $38 million budget. While that sounds like it made money, when you factor in the time commitment and expectations, it was a huge flop. Critics liked it, and it seems to have been enjoyed by the audiences that did catch it in theaters, but ultimately it came and went without much fanfare. The movie was originally rumored to be the fourth Cloverfield film until Abrams publicly stated that it would be just a standalone project. It's possible that the fans were disappointed that it wasn't linked to the popular series, and maybe that's why the movie failed, or perhaps it was the post-October release window. 5 years later, the movie is slowly building its reputation and continues to make money on Blu-ray and 4K. Overlord has very little to trim, and its nearly 2-hour runtime feels brisk. With so much going for it, the movie deserves a second chance at life, much like the serum at the center of the story. Check it out if you want to see a great blend of horror and war that is absolutely one of the best horror movies you never saw.